I want to tell you about the day my husband came home with a red sports car and a 27-year-old girlfriend. Well, she wasn't his girlfriend yet, not officially, but I saw it in his eyes the moment he walked through that door. That restless, hungry look that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with running away from himself. He was 54 years old. We'd been married for 31 years, and suddenly, out of nowhere, my husband decided he needed to find himself. Find himself, like he'd been lost all this time, like the life we'd built together, the children we'd raised, the home we'd made, the dreams we'd shared, was just a detour on the way to his real life. I stood in our kitchen that evening, watching him talk about this car like it was the answer to all his prayers, and I felt something shift inside me, something cold and clear and surprisingly calm. Because here's what I realized in that moment, honey. Here's what took me 31 years in a red sports car to finally understand. His midlife crisis wasn't my problem. His panic about getting older, his fear of death, his desperate need to feel young and virile and alive again, none of that was mine to fix. None of that was mine to carry. None of that was mine to sacrifice myself for. I'd spent 3 decades being the steady one, the supportive one, the woman who held everything together while her husband chased whatever shiny thing caught his attention. I made excuses for him, covered for him, shrunk myself down to make room for his ego. But not this time. This time, I was done. Now, I know some of you listening might think I'm being harsh. You might think a good wife would stand by her man, help him through this difficult time, be patient and understanding while he figured things out. And maybe that's true for some situations. Maybe some midlife crises are genuine spiritual awakenings that deserve support and compassion. But let me tell you something I've learned in my 67 years on this earth. There's a difference between supporting someone through a hard time and enabling someone to destroy everything you've built together. There's a difference between patience and doormat. There's a difference between understanding and erasure. And that evening, standing in my kitchen, watching my husband gush about a car that cost more than our daughter's college tuition, I finally learned to tell the difference. So settle in, friends. Pour yourself some tea, because Auntie May has some things to say about midlife crises and marriage and what it really means to choose yourself when the person you love is choosing everything but you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning so you can understand how I ended up in that kitchen, watching my whole marriage unravel over a red sports car. My name is Loretta Jean Williams. I was born in 1956 in a small town in Mississippi, the kind of place where everybody went to church on Sunday and minded everybody else's business the rest of the week. My daddy was a mechanic, my mama was a school teacher, and I was the oldest of 4 children. 3 girls and a boy. Being the oldest meant being responsible. It meant looking after my younger siblings while mama graded papers and daddy worked late at the shop. It meant learning to cook and clean and keep a household running before I was old enough to drive. It meant putting everyone else's needs before my own, because that's what good daughters did. I didn't mind, not really. I loved my family. I loved being needed, and I was good at it. Good at anticipating what people wanted, good at smoothing over conflicts, good at making sure everyone was happy and taken care of. Looking back now, I can see that I was already practicing for the role I'd play for the next 50 years, already learning to disappear into the service of others, already believing that my value came from what I could do, not who I was. But that's a lesson I wouldn't fully understand until much later, until that red sports car pulled into my driveway. I met Richard Williams in the fall of 1973 when I was 17 years old. He was tall and handsome with a smile that could light up a room. He just started working at his uncle's insurance company, wearing suits that were a little too big for him and talking about all the things he was going to accomplish someday. Richard had ambition. That's what drew me to him first. In our small town, most boys were content to follow in their father's footsteps, working at the mill or the plant or the farm, living the same lives their parents had lived. But Richard wanted more. He wanted to be somebody. He had dreams that stretched far beyond our little corner of Mississippi. And when he looked at me, he made me feel like I could be part of those dreams. "You're different, Loretta," he told me on our third date, parked by the lake under a sky full of stars. "You're not like the other girls around here. You've got something special." I didn't know what that special something was, but I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Nobody had ever looked at me and seen anything other than responsible Loretta, dependable Loretta, the girl who took care of everything so nobody else had to. But Richard saw something more, or at least he said he did.
We got married in June of 1975, right after I graduated from high school. I was 19 years old, full of hope and excitement and the absolute certainty that Richard and I were going to build something beautiful together. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, held in the same church where I'd been baptized as a baby. I wore a dress my mama had sewn by hand, with lace she'd been saving since her own wedding. Richard wore a new suit he'd bought with 3 months of savings. We didn't have much money, but we had each other. And back then, that felt like enough. We moved into a tiny apartment above a hardware store in town. It had 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a bathroom with a window that wouldn't close all the way. In winter, you could see your breath while you brushed your teeth. But I made it into a home. I hung curtains I'd sewn myself. I found furniture at garage sales and thrift stores, painted it pretty colors, arranged it just so. I cooked meals on a 2-burner stove and washed dishes in a sink so small I had to do them in batches. Richard was working his way up at the insurance company. He worked long hours, came home tired, and expected dinner on the table when he walked through the door. I didn't mind. That was the arrangement, wasn't it? He provided, I supported. He built his career, I built our home. That's just how things were. Our first child, a son we named Marcus, was born in the spring of 1977. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and angry, like he already knew life wasn't going to be easy. Richard held him for about 10 minutes, declared him a fine-looking boy, and then went back to work. I didn't think much of it at the time. Men didn't do the baby stuff back then, not like they do now. That was women's work, the feeding and the changing and the endless sleepless nights. Richard's job was to provide. My job was everything else. So I did everything else. 2 years later, our daughter Angela was born. Then in 1982, our youngest, David. 3 children and 5 years. My days became a blur of diapers and bottles and tiny hands reaching for me, needing me, depending on me for everything. I was exhausted, bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. There were days when I couldn't remember if I'd eaten breakfast, days when I wore the same spit-up stained shirt for a week straight, days when I hid in the bathroom and cried because I didn't know how I was going to make it through another hour, let alone another day. But I never complained. Not to Richard, not to my mama, not to anyone. Complaining wasn't what good mothers did. Good mothers just kept going, kept smiling, kept holding everything together no matter what. So that's what I did. Richard's career took off in the 1980s. He'd moved from his uncle's company to a bigger firm in the city. Then he'd started his own agency. He was good at sales. He had that charm, that ability to make people trust him, to make them believe he had their best interests at heart. The money started coming in. We moved out of that tiny apartment and into a real house, a 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard big enough for a swing set, then a bigger house, then an even bigger one in the nicest neighborhood in town with a 2-car garage and a swimming pool.
Richard was living his dream. He was becoming the somebody he'd always wanted to be. And me? I was becoming invisible. Oh, I was still there, still cooking the meals and cleaning the house and raising the children, still hosting dinner parties for Richard's business associates and smiling at their wives and pretending to care about things I didn't care about, still being the supportive wife, the perfect partner, the woman behind the successful man. But somewhere along the way, Loretta had disappeared. I didn't notice it happening. That's the thing about disappearing. It happens so slowly, so gradually, that you don't realize it until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back. I stopped reading books because Richard said I was always too distracted. I stopped seeing my friends because Richard's schedule was too demanding for me to make plans. I stopped singing in the church choir because Richard thought it was a waste of time. One by one, I gave up the pieces of myself that didn't fit into Richard's vision of our life. And he never even noticed they were gone, because to him, those pieces had never been important in the first place. The children grew up and left home. Marcus went to college, then law school, then a big firm in Atlanta. Angela got married young, had babies of her own, and moved to the suburbs. David joined the military, traveled the world, and settled in California with a wife I'd only met twice. The house went quiet. The rooms that had once been full of noise and chaos and life became empty and still. Richard and I rattled around in all that space, two strangers who'd been married for 25 years but didn't know how to talk to each other anymore. I thought maybe things would get better. Maybe with the kids gone, we could reconnect, rediscover each other, remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. But that's not what happened. What happened was Richard started working more, staying late at the office, taking business trips that seemed to get longer and longer. When he was home, he was distant, distracted, always on his phone or his computer or his mind somewhere far away from me. I tried to reach him. I suggested date nights and vacations and couples counseling. He brushed off every idea like it was an annoyance, like I was an annoyance, like my need for connection was just another demand on his already overtaxed time. "Everything's fine, Loretta," he'd say. "You worry too much. Just relax and enjoy what we've built." What we've built. Like our marriage was a house, a structure, something you could point to and say, "See, it's still standing." But houses can be empty. Houses can be cold. Houses can look perfect from the outside, while inside, everything is falling apart. I was 50 years old when I realized I was lonely. Not alone. I was rarely alone. There was always something to do, somewhere to be, someone who needed something, but lonely. Deep in my bones, aching in my soul, lonely. I had a husband who didn't see me, children who had their own lives, friends I'd neglected for so long they'd stopped reaching out. I had a beautiful home and a successful husband and everything I was supposed to want. And I was lonelier than I'd ever been in my life. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know how. How do you explain to people that you have everything and still feel like you have nothing? How do you admit that your perfect life is actually empty at the core? So I kept quiet, kept smiling, kept playing the role of happy wife, satisfied woman, lucky Loretta whose husband had made something of himself. And I waited for something to change. The warning sign started a few years before the red car. Richard turned 50 and had what I thought was just a rough patch. He started going to the gym obsessively, lost 30 pounds, grew out his hair. He bought new clothes, younger clothes, tighter clothes, clothes that made him look like he was trying too hard. I told myself it was normal. Lots of men hit 50 and suddenly become aware of their mortality. Lots of men try to recapture their youth, to prove they've still got it. It didn't mean anything. Then came the comments about our life. "Don't you think this house is too big for us?" he'd say. "Maybe we should downsize, start fresh somewhere new." Or, "I've been thinking about selling the business, doing something different, something more meaningful." Or, "We never really traveled when we were young, did we? We should see the world before it's too late." I agreed with some of it. The house was too big. Travel sounded nice. Change wasn't necessarily bad. But something in his tone made me uneasy. Something in the way he said we should start fresh that made it sound like he meant I should start fresh. Something in the restless energy that crackled around him like he was a bomb waiting to go off. I tried to talk to him about it. "Richard, is everything okay? You seem unsettled lately." He'd wave me off. "I'm fine, just doing some thinking." A man's allowed to think, isn't he? "Of course. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If you're thinking about making changes, I want to be part of that conversation." He'd look at me then, really look at me, and something would flicker across his face. Something I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe? Or resentment? Or something even darker. "Loretta, you worry too much. Everything's fine. Trust me." Trust me. The two words that should have told me everything I needed to know. But I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that 31 years of marriage meant something, that the life we built together was solid enough to withstand whatever storm was coming. I was wrong. Let me tell you about the woman. I found out about her before the red car, though I didn't realize it at the time. Her name was Brittany, and she was a new hire at Richard's agency. 27 years old, fresh out of college, all long legs and shiny hair, and that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real hardship. Richard mentioned her casually one night at dinner. "We've got this new girl at work, Brittany, sharp as a tack. She's going to go far in this business." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Richard talked about his employees all the time. It was just shop talk, the kind of thing he shared to fill the silence between us. But then he kept talking about her. Brittany closed a big account. Brittany had such fresh ideas. Brittany understood the younger market in a way the rest of them couldn't. Brittany, Brittany, Brittany. I started to notice how his face changed when he said her name, how his voice got a little lighter, a little more animated, how he'd check his phone more often, smiling at something on the screen. I told myself I was being paranoid. Richard was 54 years old, a successful businessman, a deacon at our church. He wasn't the type to have an affair with some girl young enough to be his daughter. Except, as I would soon learn, there is no type. There's just people making choices. And the choices Richard was making had nothing to do with me. The red car showed up on a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen making dinner, pot roast, Richard's favorite, when I heard an engine I didn't recognize pull into the driveway. I looked out the window and saw it. A bright red sports car, sleek and low and completely ridiculous. And there was Richard, climbing out of it with a grin on his face like a kid on Christmas morning.
My heart sank. I didn't even know why yet, not fully. But some deep instinct told me that this car was more than just a car. This car was a symbol, a declaration, a line in the sand. Richard came bounding into the kitchen, his eyes bright with excitement. "Did you see it? Did you see the car?" "I saw it," I said carefully. "What is it?" "It's a Porsche 911, red, manual transmission. I've wanted one of these my whole life, Loretta, my whole life." I stared at him. "We never talked about this. You never mentioned wanting a sports car." "I'm mentioning it now." He grabbed my hands, pulled me toward the door. "Come on, come see it. It's beautiful." I let him lead me outside, my mind racing. The car was beautiful in a flashy and practical way, the kind of car a young man drives when he wants to impress people, the kind of car that screams, "I'm having a midlife crisis," louder than any words ever could. "How much?" I asked quietly. Richard's grin faltered just slightly. "Does it matter?" "Of course it matters. We have a budget, Richard. We have retirement to think about. We have—" "Loretta?" His voice hardened. "I've worked my whole life for this. 54 years of doing what I'm supposed to do, being who I'm supposed to be. Can't I have one thing that's just for me?" I looked at him. This man I'd been married to for 31 years, and I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw a stranger. "Richard," I said slowly, "what's really going on here?" He dropped my hands and turned away. "Nothing's going on. I bought a car, that's all. Why do you have to make everything into a federal case?" "Because this isn't like you. The gym, the clothes, the talk about starting fresh, and now this car. Something's happening and you're not telling me what it is." For a long moment, Richard didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at that red car like it held all the answers to questions I wasn't supposed to ask. Then he turned around, and the look on his face made my blood run cold. "Maybe," he said quietly. "I'm tired of being Richard Williams, responsible husband, successful businessman, pillar of the community. Maybe I want to be someone else for a while." Did you ever think of that? Someone else. And who would that someone else be? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because I already knew. That night, lying in bed next to a man who felt like a stranger, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to twist myself into knots trying to be whatever Richard needed me to be so he wouldn't leave. I'd spent 31 years doing that. 31 years of shrinking, accommodating, disappearing. And where had it gotten me? Alone in a big empty house with a husband who wanted to be someone else. No. If Richard was going through some kind of crisis, that was his business, his journey, his problem to solve. But it wasn't going to be mine. I didn't know yet what that would look like. I didn't have a plan or a roadmap or any idea what the future held. All I had was a certainty that had been building for years, maybe decades, finally crystallizing into something I could hold on to. I was done sacrificing myself for a man who didn't even see me. I was done being invisible. I was done. The weeks after that red car showed up were some of the strangest of my life. On the surface, nothing changed. Richard still went to work. I still made dinner. We still slept in the same bed, sat at the same table, moved through the same routines we'd been moving through for 31 years. But underneath, everything was different. Richard was different. He was lighter somehow, more energetic, like a man who'd been carrying a heavy weight and it finally set it down. He whistled in the mornings, he smiled at his phone. He took that red car out for drives every evening, disappearing for hours and coming back smelling like cologne I didn't recognize. He never told me where he went. I never asked. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was still hoping this was just a phase, a temporary madness that would pass once he got whatever he needed out of his system. Part of me was still the good wife, the patient wife, the wife who believed that if she just held on long enough, everything would go back to normal. But another part of me, the part that had woken up that night in bed, the part that had decided I was done, knew better. Normal wasn't coming back. Normal never really existed in the first place. I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Not to Richard. I was done trying to figure him out. But to myself. To my own thoughts and feelings and needs. The ones I'd been ignoring for so long I'd forgotten they existed. I noticed that I felt relieved when Richard left for work in the mornings. That the house felt lighter, easier, more like home when he wasn't in it. I noticed that I dreaded the sound of his car in the driveway, that my shoulders tensed up when he walked through the door, that I held my breath waiting to see what mood he'd be in, what comment he'd make, what new way he'd find to make me feel small. I noticed that I'd been living like this for years, decades maybe, so focused on keeping the peace, keeping him happy, keeping the marriage intact, that I'd stopped noticing how miserable I was inside it. That realization hit me like a truck. I wasn't just unhappy because of the midlife crisis. I'd been unhappy for a long, long time. The crisis was just making it impossible to ignore anymore. The first confrontation came about 3 weeks after the car. It was a Saturday morning. Richard was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone with that secretive little smile I'd come to dread. I was making coffee, trying not to watch him, trying not to care. But something snapped. "Who are you texting?" The words came out before I could stop them. Richard looked up, startled. "What?" "Your phone. You're always on it now. Who are you talking to?" His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, guilt, defensiveness, and finally something hard and cold that I didn't recognize. "That's none of your business, Loretta." None of my business? I set down my coffee cup with more force than I intended. "I'm your wife. How is it none of my business?" "Because it's my phone, my private conversations. I'm allowed to have some privacy, aren't I?" Privacy is one thing, secrets are another. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Richard, I know something's going on. The car, the gym, the clothes, and now you're glued to your phone like a teenager. Just tell me the truth. Whatever it is, I can handle it." For a long moment, Richard didn't say anything. He just looked at me with those cold, hard eyes like I was a stranger who had wandered into his house uninvited. Then he laughed. Not a nice laugh, not a warm laugh. A mean laugh, dismissive and cutting. "You want the truth, Loretta? Fine. Here's the truth. I'm bored. I'm bored with this house, this routine, this life we've been living for 30 years. I wake up every morning feeling like I'm suffocating, like I'm trapped in a box that keeps getting smaller and smaller. And the car was supposed to fix that? The car was a start, but it's not enough. Nothing's enough. I feel like I'm dying, Loretta, like my life is slipping away and I haven't done anything that matters."
We raised 3 children, I said quietly. We built a business. We built a life together. That doesn't matter? He waved his hand dismissively. That's your life, Loretta. Your accomplishments. The kids, the house, the community stuff. That's all you. What have I done? Really done for myself? I stared at him in disbelief. The business was yours, Richard. That was your dream. I supported you every step of the way. Exactly. You supported me. Like it was your job. Like I was just another one of your projects. Another thing for you to manage and organize and control. Control? The word felt like a slap. When have I ever controlled you? I've done nothing but support you for 31 years. I gave up everything. There it is. Richard's voice was triumphant, ugly. There's the martyr act. I gave up everything. You always do this, Loretta. You always make yourself the victim. Something inside me went very still. I'd heard these words before. Not from Richard, but from somewhere deep in my memory. From a book I'd read once, or a talk show I'd watched, or a conversation with a friend. This was called deflection. He was doing something wrong, and instead of taking responsibility, he was turning it around on me, making me the problem, making my feelings the issue instead of his behavior. I'd been falling for this for 31 years. Not anymore. I'm not being a martyr, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I'm stating facts. I did give up things for this marriage. My career, my friends, my interests. I set them all aside to support you and raise our children. That's not a complaint. That's just what happened. And now you want me to feel guilty about it? No, Richard, I don't want you to feel anything. I just want you to be honest with me. I took a step toward him. Who is she? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Richard's face went pale. Who is who? The woman you're texting. The woman you're dressing up for. The woman who makes you feel less bored, less trapped, less like you're dying. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. I'm not stupid, Richard. I know there's someone else. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Then his shoulders slumped. Her name is Brittany, he said quietly. I nodded slowly, absorbing the confirmation of what I'd already known. The girl from work. She's not a girl. She's 27 years old. She's a woman. She's young enough to be your daughter. I heard the bitterness in my voice, but didn't try to hide it. What is this, Richard? An affair? A fling? What? I don't know. He ran his hands through his hair, looking more lost than I'd ever seen him. I don't know what it is. All I know is that when I'm with her, I feel alive. I feel like myself again. The self I was before all this, before the responsibilities and the obligations and the expectations. Before me, you mean? He didn't deny it. I'm not trying to hurt you, Loretta. I need something different, something more. And you think this girl is going to give you that? I don't know, but I need to find out. I stood there in my kitchen, looking at this man I'd spent my whole adult life with, and I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not despair, not the desperate, clinging panic I'd always imagined I'd feel if Richard ever cheated on me. I felt clarity. Cold, hard, crystalline clarity. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You're having some kind of crisis. You feel old and bored and unfulfilled. And instead of talking to me about it, instead of going to therapy or taking up a hobby or doing any of the 100 healthy things you could have done, you bought a sports car and started an affair with a woman half your age. Richard flinched. It's not technically an affair. I don't care about the technicalities. Emotional affair, physical affair, it doesn't matter. You checked out of this marriage. You stopped seeing me as your partner and started seeing me as your prison. And instead of telling me that, you let me keep cooking your meals and washing your clothes and playing the role of happy wife while you were already halfway out the door. Loretta, I'm not finished. My voice was sharp, harder than I'd ever heard it. You want to know what I think, Richard? I think you're having a midlife crisis, a textbook, cliché, could have come from a movie midlife crisis. And you're handling it in the most selfish, destructive way possible. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? I gave up my 20s and 30s and 40s for this marriage. I raised your children and supported your career and put your needs ahead of my own every single day. And now, when you hit a rough patch, when you start feeling mortal and scared, your solution is to run off with a young woman who makes you feel like a big man again? Richard's face had gone from pale to red. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that your ego is more important to you than your marriage. I understand that your fear of getting old is stronger than your commitment to the life we built. And I've been killing myself to be a good wife to a man who was just waiting for an excuse to leave. I never said I was leaving. You didn't have to. You said it with every late night at the office, every secret text message, every time you looked right through me like I wasn't even there. I took a breath, steadying myself. But here's what you need to understand, Richard. Here's what I've finally figured out after all these years. I looked him dead in the eyes. Your midlife crisis is not my problem. The words landed like a bomb. Richard stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely thrown. I had never talked to him like this. Never stood up to him, never pushed back, never refused to smooth things over and make everything okay. What does that mean? He asked. It means I'm done. I said the words simply, clearly, with no hesitation. I'm done trying to fix you. Done trying to make you happy. Done sacrificing my own needs to prop up your ego. If you want to chase after some young woman because she makes you feel less afraid of dying, go ahead. But don't expect me to wait around while you figure yourself out. Loretta, I'm not saying I want a divorce. I don't care what you want anymore, Richard. And I realized as I said it that it was true. For 31 years, I've cared about what you want. I've centered my entire life around what you want. And where has it gotten me? Standing in my kitchen, finding out my husband is in love with someone else. I'm not in love with her. Then what are you? Because you sure as hell aren't in love with me. I don't think you have been for a long time. Maybe ever. That stopped him cold. I saw something flicker across his face, guilt maybe, or recognition, before he shut it down. You're being dramatic, he said. This is just a rough patch. All marriages go through rough patches. This isn't a rough patch. This is you blowing up our life because you're scared of getting old. I shook my head. And I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my legs shaking, but my head held high. Behind me, I heard Richard call my name, but I didn't stop. I just kept walking, up the stairs and into the guest bedroom where I closed the door and locked it behind me. Then I sat down on the bed and cried. Not for Richard, not for my marriage, but for myself. For the woman I'd been, the years I'd lost, the life I'd let slip away while I was busy being somebody's wife. For the first time in 31 years, I was crying for myself. And it felt like freedom. The next few weeks were a blur. Richard and I moved through the house like ghosts, occupying the same space but barely interacting. He slept in our bedroom, I slept in the guest room. He ate at restaurants, I ate alone. We passed each other in hallways and exchanged polite nothings like strangers sharing an elevator. It was awful. It was liberating. It was both at the same time. I called my sister Beverly one night, around 2 a.m, when the loneliness got to be too much. "Loretta? What's wrong? Is someone hurt?" "Richard's having an affair," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. "Oh, honey. Oh, Loretta. I'm so sorry." "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. I needed to say it out loud. To someone other than myself. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. But I'm done pretending everything's fine. I'm done being the good wife who holds it all together. I'm done making excuses for him." "Good." Beverly's voice was fierce. "He doesn't deserve excuses. He doesn't deserve you." "Maybe not. But I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing it for me." I paused, trying to find the words for what I was feeling. For 31 years, I've been Mrs. Richard Williams, his wife, his support system, his everything. And I don't even know who I am without that. I don't know what I want or what I like or who Loretta is when she's not taking care of someone else. Then maybe it's time to find out. Maybe it is. I started making changes. Small ones, at first. I stopped cooking dinner for Richard. If he wanted to eat, he could figure it out for himself. I stopped doing his laundry, stopped cleaning up after him, stopped anticipating his needs before he even knew he had them. It felt petty at first, mean-spirited. The good wife inside me kept whispering that I was being childish, that I should take the high road, that 2 wrongs don't make a right. But another voice, a newer, stronger voice, kept reminding me that I wasn't punishing Richard. I was just stopping doing things I'd never been appreciated for in the first place. There's a difference between revenge and self-preservation. I was preserving myself. I also started doing things for myself. Things I hadn't done in years, decades maybe. I joined a book club at the library. I'd always loved reading back when Richard made me feel like it was a waste of time. Now, I devoured novels like a woman starving, losing myself in stories that had nothing to do with my own broken life. I started going for walks in the mornings, long walks, sometimes 2 or 3 hours through neighborhoods I'd never explored and parks I'd never visited. I'd lived in this town for 30 years and barely knew it because I'd always been too busy, too tired, too focused on everyone else's needs. I reconnected with old friends, women I'd lost touch with because Richard's schedule always came first. They were shocked to hear what was happening, but supportive, understanding. They'd seen the warning signs before I had, they admitted. They just hadn't known how to tell me.
And I started talking to a therapist. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Monroe, a Black woman in her 60s with silver locks and kind eyes, and a way of asking questions that cut right to the heart of things. I found her through a referral from my pastor, and from our very first session, I knew she was going to change my life. "Tell me about your marriage," she said in that first appointment. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me. Start wherever feels right." So I started. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I told her about Richard, about the affair, about the red car and the midlife crisis. But I also told her about myself, about the responsible oldest child, the supportive wife, the woman who had spent her whole life taking care of everyone except herself. I told her about the loneliness, the invisibility, the slow creeping disappearance that I'd never even noticed until it was almost complete. I told her things I'd never told anyone, things I'd barely admitted to myself. And when I was done, when I'd talked for almost the entire session without taking a breath, Dr. Monroe looked at me with those kind, wise eyes and said something I'll never forget. "Loretta, you spent your whole life being everything to everyone else. When did you stop being someone to yourself?" I didn't have an answer, but I was going to find one. The confrontation with Brittany happened by accident. I'd gone to Richard's office to pick up some papers, insurance documents, things I needed for my own accounts. I hadn't seen Richard in days. He'd been staying late at work, probably with her, and coming home after I was already in bed. I didn't tell him I was coming. I didn't think I needed to. But when I walked into the reception area, there she was, Brittany. She was younger than I'd expected, and prettier. Long blonde hair, big blue eyes, the kind of fresh-faced beauty that doesn't know yet what time will do to it. She was sitting at the reception desk, laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware of who had just walked in. I stood there for a moment, just looking at her. This was the woman my husband thought could save him. This child, barely older than my own daughter, who probably thought she was special because a powerful older man had noticed her. She wasn't special. She was a cliché, a pawn in Richard's desperate attempt to outrun death. She looked up and saw me, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe, or guilt, or just the dawning realization that she was face to face with the woman's life she was helping to destroy. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm looking for Richard Williams. I'm his wife." The word landed like a stone in still water. I saw Brittany's face go pale, saw her eyes dart to the hallway where Richard's office was. He's in a meeting," she stammered. "Can I take a message?" "No, I'll wait." I sat down in one of the reception chairs, folding my hands in my lap, and I waited. Brittany kept glancing at me, clearly uncomfortable, clearly unsure what to do. I could have felt sorry for her. She was young, probably confused, probably believing whatever lies Richard had told her about his unhappy marriage and his cold, distant wife. But I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel much of anything. Richard came out of his office about 15 minutes later, laughing at something, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Then he saw me. The laugh died in his throat. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, guilt, anger, fear, before settling into something carefully blank. "Loretta, what are you doing here?" "I need some documents, insurance papers, things I needed for my own accounts." I kept my voice pleasant, conversational, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "I called your assistant, but she said to come by." "You could have called me." "I could have, but then we wouldn't have had this lovely opportunity to meet." I turned my gaze to Brittany, who looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. "Hello, Brittany. Richard's told me so much about you." The silence that followed was exquisite. Brittany's face went from pale to red. Richard's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. The other employees in the office were suddenly very busy with their work, not looking at us, but obviously listening to every word. "Let's go to my office," Richard said finally, his voice strained. "Of course." I followed him down the hallway, feeling stronger with every step. This wasn't the confrontation I'd planned. I hadn't planned any confrontation, but it felt right. It felt necessary. It felt like taking back my power. In his office, Richard closed the door and turned to face me. "What the hell was that about?" "I told you I needed documents. You came here to make a scene, to humiliate me in front of my staff." "I didn't make a scene. I was perfectly polite." I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "If you're humiliated,
maybe you should think about why that is. Maybe you should think about what you've been doing that might be humiliating. Richard's face reddened. This isn't the time or place. Then when is the time and place, Richard? When were you planning to have this conversation? When you'd already left? When you'd already moved in with your girlfriend? When I found out from someone else that my marriage was over? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Tell me. Help me understand. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair with a woman younger than you could be your daughter, lying to me about it, and making plans to blow up our life without even having the courtesy to tell me. Richard's shoulders slumped. For the first time since this whole mess started, he looked old, tired, defeated. I don't know what I'm doing, Loretta. I really don't. I just know that I'm not happy. That I haven't been happy for a long time. And Brittany, she makes me feel something again, something I thought I'd lost. And what about me? What about my happiness? Did that ever occur to you? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. He didn't care. He genuinely, truly didn't care about my happiness. Maybe he never had. Maybe I'd been invisible to him from the very beginning, just a supporting character in the story of his life. I can't fix you, Richard. I spent 31 years trying to make you happy, and all I did was lose myself in the process. Your midlife crisis, your affair, your desperate need to feel young again, that's your stuff, not mine. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done. I'm saying I want a divorce. The word fell into the space between us like a boulder. Richard's face went slack with shock. Loretta, wait! No, I'm done waiting. I've been waiting my whole life for you to see me, to appreciate me, to love me the way I deserve to be loved. And it's never going to happen. I know that now. So I'm setting us both free. You can go be whoever you want to be, and I can finally start figuring out who I am. I turned and walked toward the door. Loretta, please. Goodbye, Richard. I walked out of that office, past the staring employees, past Brittany's stunned face, out into the afternoon sunshine, and for the first time in 31 years, I felt like I could breathe. The weeks after I asked for a divorce were the hardest of my life. Not because I regretted the decision. I didn't. Every morning I woke up in that guest bedroom. Every day I spent in that house with a man who felt like a stranger. Every moment of that strange, suspended existence confirmed that I'd made the right choice. But knowing you're doing the right thing doesn't make it easy. 31 years of marriage doesn't just dissolve overnight. There were lawyers to consult, finances to untangle, decisions to make about the house and the accounts and all the physical accumulation of 3 decades of shared life. There were children to tell, friends to inform, a whole community to face with the news that the Williams family was falling apart. And there was grief. So much grief. Not for Richard. I had already grieved the loss of him. Or rather the loss of the man that I thought he was, but for myself, for the woman I'd been, the years I'd lost, the life I'd let slip away while I was busy being somebody's wife. I grieved for the young Loretta who had stood at that altar in her mama's wedding dress, so full of hope and certainty. I grieved for the mother who'd poured everything she had into her children, never saving anything for herself. I grieve for all the books I didn't read, the friends I didn't keep, the dreams I didn't chase because there was always someone else who needed something. I grieve for the woman I might have been if I'd chosen myself instead of disappearing into service. That grief was heavy. Some days it felt like it would crush me, but it was also necessary. Dr. Monroe told me that grief was the price of truth, that I couldn't move forward without first acknowledging what I'd lost. I was angry at all of it, and the anger felt good. The anger felt powerful.
The anger felt like fuel for the transformation I was finally ready to make. Richard didn't take the divorce well. I hadn't expected him to. For all his talk about feeling trapped and suffocated, the reality of losing his marriage, of losing me, hit him harder than he'd anticipated. He tried everything. First came the apologies, long, tearful confessions about how sorry he was, how he made a terrible mistake, how he'd do anything to make it right. He showed up at the house with flowers, with jewelry, with promises that he'd change. I listened. I didn't interrupt. And when he was done, I said, "I appreciate you saying that, but it doesn't change anything." Then came the anger. He accused me of being cold, unfeeling, unwilling to work on our marriage. He said I was giving up too easily, that 31 years should count for something, that I owed it to our family to at least try. I did try, I told him. For 31 years, I tried. I tried so hard, I forgot who I was. And now I'm done trying. Then came the bargaining. Maybe we could do a trial separation. Maybe we could go to counseling. Maybe we could take some time apart and see how we felt in a few months. I considered it. Part of me, the old part, the good wife part, wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe that maybe, with enough effort, we could fix what was broken. But Dr. Monroe helped me see the truth. "What would you be going back to, Loretta?" she asked me one afternoon. "If Richard changed tomorrow, if he suddenly became the husband you always wanted him to be, would that be enough?" I thought about it, really thought about it, and I realized the answer was no. Because the problem wasn't just Richard. The problem was me. The problem was who I'd become inside that marriage, the woman who'd lost herself so completely that she didn't know how to exist without someone else to take care of. Even if Richard transformed into the perfect husband, I would still be that woman, still defined by my relationship to him, still invisible, just in a different way. I needed to find myself. And I couldn't do that while I was still Mrs. Richard Williams. I need to be on my own, I told Dr. Monroe. Not to punish Richard, not to prove a point, just to find out who I am when I'm not being somebody's wife. That's a brave choice, Loretta. It doesn't feel brave. It feels terrifying. Brave things usually do. Telling the children was harder than I expected. I called a family meeting. Marcus flew in from Atlanta, Angela drove over from the suburbs, and David video called from California. We sat in the living room of the house where they'd grown up, and I told them their father and I were getting divorced. The reactions were mixed. Marcus was angry, not at Richard, surprisingly, but at me. "How can you just give up?" he demanded. 31 years, Mom. You don't just walk away from 31 years. "I'm not giving up," I said calmly. "I'm choosing myself. There's a difference." "What does that even mean?" "Dad made a mistake. People make mistakes. You work through it, you forgive, you move on." "It wasn't a mistake, Marcus. It was a pattern, a lifetime of being overlooked and undervalued." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, and I saw so much of Richard in him. I know this is hard for you to understand, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for a marriage that isn't working. Angela was quieter, more thoughtful. She'd seen more than her brothers, I think. She'd watched me over the years, noticed things the boys had missed. "Are you okay, Mama?" she asked softly. After Marcus had stormed out and David had said his awkward goodbyes. "I will be. For the first time in a long time, I really believe that. I'm proud of you." She took my hand, squeezed it tight. "I know that probably sounds strange, but I am. It takes courage to do what you're doing. Thank you, baby. That means more than you know." David called me later that night after everyone else had gone. "Mom, I just want you to know, I get it. I know Dad hasn't always been, present. I know you've carried a lot of the weight in that marriage." "You notice?" "Of course I noticed. I just didn't know what to do about it." He paused. "I'm sorry I wasn't there more. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You were living your life, honey. That's exactly what you were supposed to be doing." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I never wanted you kids to worry about me. I wanted you to be free." "Maybe too free," he said quietly. "Maybe we took you for granted, just like Dad did." "Maybe, but that's not on you. That's on me. I taught you to take me for granted by never asking for anything different." I took a deep breath. "But I'm asking now. I'm asking for the space to figure out who I am, outside of being your mother, Richard's wife, everybody's caretaker." "You've got it, Mom. Whatever you need. Just your love. That's all I've ever needed." "You've always had that. Always." The actual divorce proceedings took longer than I expected. Richard hired an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that I wasn't entitled to half of everything we'd built. His position was that he'd earned the money, built the business, done the real work while I just stayed home and managed the household. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who didn't take any nonsense, shut that down fast. "Your client's business success was only possible because my client handled everything else. Childcare, household management, social obligations, emotional labor. Mrs. Williams was an unpaid employee of this marriage for 31 years. She's entitled to fair compensation." Richard's lawyer sputtered about traditional roles and personal choices, but Patricia wasn't having it. In the end, we reached a settlement that was fair. I got half of everything, including a portion of the business. I got the house, which I planned to sell. I got enough to start over, to build a new life on my own terms. But more than the money, more than the assets, I got my freedom, and that was priceless. The turning point, the real turning point, came on a Tuesday afternoon in spring. I was sitting in Dr. Monroe's office, talking about the divorce, about my plans for the future, about all the things I wanted to do now that I was finally free to do them. "I want to travel," I told her. "I've never really traveled. Richard always had excuses. Too busy, too expensive, too impractical. But I want to see the world. I want to go to Paris and Rome and all the places I've only read about in books." "What's stopping you?" "Nothing. That's the thing. Nothing's stopping me anymore." I laughed, a little giddy with the realization. For 31 years, I put my life on hold, waiting for someone else's permission. And now I don't need permission. I can just go. Dr. Monroe smiled. "That's wonderful progress, Loretta. But can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What have you learned from all this? Not just about Richard or your marriage, but about yourself?"
I thought about it for a long moment. It was a big question, the kind that deserves a careful answer. "I've learned that I matter," I said finally. "That my needs and wants and dreams are just as important as anyone else's. That taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary." "What else?"
I've learned that I was complicit in my own disappearing. I let myself become invisible because it felt safer, easier, more acceptable. But invisible isn't the same as peaceful. Invisible is just another word for lost. And what about Richard? What have you learned about him? This was the harder question, the one I'd been avoiding. I've learned that his midlife crisis was never really about me, I said slowly. It was about him, his fears, his regrets, his inability to face his own mortality. He wasn't running away from our marriage. He was running away from himself. And is that your problem? I smiled. No, it's not. I spent 31 years trying to fix Richard, trying to make him happy, trying to fill whatever hole he had inside him. But I couldn't. Nobody could. Because the hole wasn't about me, it was about him. So what does that mean for you going forward? I took a deep breath. It means I'm done trying to fix other people. I'm done sacrificing myself for problems that aren't mine to solve. I'm done being the caretaker, the fixer, the one who holds everything together at her own expense. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but they were good tears. Healing tears. It means I'm finally ready to take care of myself. Dr. Monroe reached across and took my hand. Loretta, I want you to hear something. Really hear it. Okay. You are not responsible for Richard's happiness. You are not responsible for his choices, his crisis, his affair. You are not responsible for fixing him or saving him or being whatever he needs you to be. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. His midlife crisis is not your problem. It was never your problem. And the best thing you can do for yourself and for him is to stop making it your problem. I know, I whispered. I finally know. Good. She squeezed my hand. Now let's talk about what comes next.
For so long, I believed that my best years were behind me, that youth was the only time that counted, that by the time you hit 50, 60, 70, life was supposed to be about winding down, settling in, accepting what you'd been given. Richard believed that too. That's what his midlife crisis was really about. The terror of looking in the mirror and seeing time running out, the desperate need to grab onto youth before it slipped away forever. But here's what Richard never understood, what I didn't understand either until I was forced to learn it. The best years aren't about age, they're about authenticity. The best years are whenever you finally stop pretending, whenever you finally start living for yourself instead of everyone else, whenever you finally choose yourself. For some people, that happens at 20. For others, it happens at 40 or 60 or 80. For me, it happened at 61, standing in my kitchen, watching my husband gush about a red sports car while his midlife crisis burned our marriage to the ground. Better late than never, as my mama used to say. The apartment I moved into after the divorce has become a real home now. It's small, just 2 bedrooms and a balcony, but every inch of it is mine. I've filled it with things I love, books stacked on every surface, art on the walls that makes me happy, plants that I talk to in the mornings while I water them. The walls are still yellow, that warm golden yellow that Richard never knew was my favorite color. Every time I walk into my living room and see that sunshine color wrapping around me, I smile. This is what it feels like to be seen, I think, even if I'm the only one doing the seeing. I've developed routines that nourish me instead of depleting me. In the mornings, I wake up slowly, without an alarm. I make coffee in a little French press I bought in Paris, and I sit on my balcony watching the garden come alive. I read for an hour, sometimes two, losing myself in stories the way I used to before Richard made me feel guilty for having my nose in a book. In the afternoons, I do whatever calls to me. Sometimes that's a long walk through the neighborhood. Sometimes it's lunch with a friend. Sometimes it's just puttering around my apartment, enjoying the luxury of having nowhere to be and no one to answer to. In the evenings, I cook for myself. Real meals, things I actually want to eat, not just whatever Richard preferred. I've discovered that I love spicy food, something I never knew because Richard couldn't handle anything with heat. I've discovered that I prefer wine to beer, salads to steaks, breakfast for dinner whenever I feel like it. Such small things, really. Such small acts of self-knowledge. But they add up to something big. They add up to a life that's mine. I've made new friends in these years. Real friends. Not just acquaintances who came with Richard's business or the social obligations of being his wife. There's Martha, who I met in a painting class I took on a whim. She's 72, a retired nurse, and she has the dirtiest sense of humor of anyone I've ever known. We get lunch every Tuesday and laugh until our sides hurt. There's Denise, who lives in my building and lost her husband 3 years ago. We bonded over our shared experience of learning to be alone after decades of being partnered. She's teaching me to play bridge, and I'm teaching her to use her smartphone. There's the whole crew from my book club, 8 women ranging in age from 45 to 83, all of us passionate about reading and not afraid to argue about what we've read. We meet every other week and talk for hours about books and life and everything in between. These friendships feel different from any I had before. They're not based on obligation or proximity or the social requirements of being Richard's wife. They're based on genuine connection, on actually liking each other, on choosing to spend time together because we want to. I didn't know friendship could feel like this. I didn't know it could be so easy, so nourishing, so free. But then again, there's a lot I didn't know before I chose myself. The relationship with my children has transformed in ways I never expected. Marcus, who was so angry when I first announced the divorce, has come around. It took time, almost 2 years of strained conversations and awkward visits, but eventually he started to see what I'd been trying to tell him. "I think I get it now, Mom," he said one afternoon, about a year ago. We were having lunch at a little cafe near his office in Atlanta. I was so focused on what the divorce meant for our family that I didn't think about what the marriage had meant for you. What changed your mind? He was quiet for a moment. I watched Dad. After you left, after Brittany left, I watched him fall apart, and I realized something. He didn't miss you specifically. He missed having someone to take care of him, someone to manage his life so he didn't have to. I nodded slowly. It was a hard truth, but it was true. And then I thought about you, about how you'd spent your whole life being that person. And I thought, that's not fair. That's not what marriage should be. That's not what love should be. No, I agreed. It's not. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Mom. I'm sorry I made the divorce harder for you. You were processing, honey. We all process in our own way. I reached across the table and took a hand. I'm glad we got here. I'm glad we can be honest with each other now. Angela has become my closest confidant. She calls me every week, not because she needs something, but just to talk. We share stories about our lives, our struggles, our joys. She tells me about her kids, my grandchildren, and I tell her about my travels and my friends and the book I'm reading. It's the kind of relationship I always wanted with my daughter, but didn't know how to have when I was still playing the role of self-sacrificing mother. You're different now, Mama, she told me recently. Lighter, more yourself somehow. I am myself, maybe for the first time ever. I want to be like you when I grow up. And we both laughed because she's 43 years old and long past grown. But I knew what she meant. She wanted to be like this version of me,
the one who chose herself, who refused to disappear, who found joy in her own company. And honestly, I want to be like this version of me too. David and I have found our own way of connecting. He lives in California still, too far for regular visits, but we video chat every Sunday morning. He makes his coffee, I make mine, and we talk for an hour about everything and nothing. He's married now to a woman named Sarah, who I adore. They're talking about having kids, and the thought of being a grandmother again fills me with joy. But it's a different kind of joy than before. Not the anxious, obligated joy of the woman who needed to be needed, just pure, simple joy at the thought of more love in the world. I've kept up with therapy, even though the immediate crisis is long past. Dr. Monroe retired 2 years ago, but she referred me to a colleague named Dr. Patterson, who I've come to trust just as much. We meet twice a month now, not because I'm in crisis, but because I've learned the value of having someone to help me process life as it happens. "You've done remarkable work, Loretta," Dr. Patterson told me in a recent session. "The transformation I've seen in you, it's not common. Most people never change as fundamentally as you have. I just got tired of being invisible. I got tired of waiting for someone else to choose me. And now you choose yourself. Every day, even when it's hard, even when the old habits try to creep back in." I smiled. "It's like a muscle, you know? The more I practice choosing myself, the stronger it gets." What does choosing yourself look like now on a daily basis? I thought about it. I've learned to love. There's something powerful about navigating a foreign city by yourself, figuring things out, proving to yourself that you're capable and competent and don't need anyone to hold your hand. Sometimes I travel with friends. Martha and I did a river cruise through Germany last fall, and it was one of the best trips of my life. We drank too much wine and laughed too loud and acted like teenagers, even though we have a combined age of nearly 140. And once I traveled with my grandchildren. Angela and her husband let me take their 2 kids, Emma, who's 14, and Jake, who's 12, to Costa Rica for a week. Just me and the grandkids, no parents allowed. We ziplined through the rainforest. We saw monkeys and sloths and toucans. We learned to surf, badly, falling off our boards more than we stayed on. We ate rice and beans for every meal and came home with sunburns and bug bites and memories that will last forever. "Grandma, you're so cool," Emma said on our last night, as we sat on the beach watching the stars come out. "I didn't used to be," I told her honestly. "I used to be invisible. I used to think my job was to stay in the background and let other people have adventures." What changed? I thought about how to answer, how to explain 40 years of self-erasure and 6 years of recovery to a 14-year-old. "I got tired of watching," I said finally. "I got tired of supporting other people's dreams while my own gathered dust. So I decided to start living my own life, even though I was already 60 years old." "Is it ever too late?" Emma asked. "To start living?" "No, honey, it's never too late. As long as you're breathing, you can choose yourself. You can choose joy. You can choose to live instead of just existing." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. Then she said, "I don't want to wait until I'm 60. "Then don't," I said. "Start now. Figure out what you want and go after it. Don't let anyone tell you that your dreams aren't important, that your needs don't matter, that you should shrink yourself down to make other people comfortable." "Did someone tell you that?" "Not in so many words,
But the world has a way of teaching women that our job is to take care of everyone else, that we're supposed to be supportive and self-sacrificing and always putting ourselves last. I looked at my granddaughter, this fierce, smart, beautiful girl on the edge of womanhood. Don't believe it, Emma. Don't you ever believe it. I won't, Grandma, she promised. And I believed her. I heard about Richard from time to time, through the children, their mutual friends, through the unavoidable small-town grapevine. He sold the business a few years after the divorce. The red sports car went shortly after. He moved to a smaller house on the other side of town, started going to a different church, and built a life that didn't intersect with mine. From what I heard, he was doing okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. He'd started therapy, according to Marcus. He was working through his issues, trying to figure out why he'd done what he did. I was glad to hear it. Not because I wanted him back, not because I cared what happened to him in any romantic sense, but because I'd spent 31 years with the man and I didn't wish him ill. I hoped he'd find peace. I hoped he'd learn to face his own mortality without running from it. I hoped he'd discover who Richard was when he wasn't trying to be young again. But I also knew that wasn't my concern. His journey was his journey. His healing was his responsibility. His midlife crisis, his mistakes, his growth, none of that was mine to manage or worry about. I'd learned to let go. Really let go, not just say the words while still carrying the weight. And that letting go was one of the most valuable things I'd ever done. About a year ago, something unexpected happened. I was at a coffee shop downtown reading a book and enjoying a quiet afternoon when a woman approached my table. "Excuse me," she said, "are you Loretta Williams?" I looked up. She was younger than me, maybe mid-50s, with tired eyes and a tense set to her shoulders that I recognized immediately. I used to be. I go by Loretta Jean now, my maiden name. I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Sandra Mitchell, and we have something in common. She sat down across from me, and before I could ask what she meant, it all came tumbling out. Her husband was having a midlife crisis. He bought a motorcycle, started working out obsessively, was probably having an affair with a woman from his gym, wanted to find himself, wanted to start fresh, wanted everything except the life he'd spent 30 years building with Sandra. She had heard about me through a mutual friend, heard that I had been through the same thing, heard that I'd come out the other side somehow. "I don't know what to do," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I've given him everything. My whole life revolves around him. And now he's just leaving?" I looked at this woman, this stranger who felt so familiar, and my heart broke for her. Because I remembered that confusion, that devastation, that desperate sense that everything you'd built your life around was crumbling to dust. "Can I tell you something?" I said gently. "Something I wish someone had told me?" "Please." I reached across the table and took her hand. "His midlife crisis is not your problem." She stared at me, not understanding. "It's his crisis, his fear, his inability to deal with aging and change, not yours. You can't fix this for him. You can't make him grow up. You can't talk him out of his crisis. You can't save the marriage single-handedly, no matter how hard you try.
To deal with his own mortality. And you can't fix it. You can't save him from it. You can't love him hard enough to make it go away. I squeezed her hand. All you can do is decide what you're going to do for yourself. But I don't know who I am without him, she whispered. I didn't either, but I learned. And you can too. I smiled at her. It's not easy. It's actually the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it. On the other side of all that pain and confusion, there's a version of you that you've never met. A version that's been waiting your whole life to be seen. What if it's too late? It's never too late. I was 61 when my marriage ended. I'm 67 now, and these have been the best years of my life. Sandra stayed at that coffee shop with me for 2 hours. We talked about everything. Her marriage, my marriage, the patterns we'd both fallen into, the ways we'd both disappeared. I gave her my therapist's number. I gave her my phone number too. Call me anytime, I said, even if you just need someone to listen. Why are you being so kind to me? I thought about the question. Because someone should have done this for me, I said. Someone should have sat me down 30 years ago and told me that my husband's problems weren't mine to solve, that I didn't have to sacrifice myself to keep him happy, that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. But nobody did. No, nobody did. So I'm doing it now for you. I smiled. Consider it paying it forward. Sandra and I have become friends since then. She's in the middle of her own divorce now, going through all the things I went through 6 years ago. It's not easy for her. Some days she calls me in tears, doubting herself, wondering if she's making the right choice. And I tell her what I wish someone had told me. His crisis isn't your problem. His happiness isn't your responsibility. His fear of getting old, his affairs, his desperate attempts to feel young again, none of that is yours to fix. Your only job is to choose yourself, to find out who you are outside of this marriage, to build a life that fills you up instead of emptying you out. It's not easy advice to follow, but it's true. And sometimes the truest things are also the hardest. I'm sitting on my balcony as I tell you this story, watching the evening light turn soft and golden over the garden below. There's a cup of tea in my hands, chamomile with honey, my favorite, and a book on the table beside me that I'll get back to when I'm done talking to you. The air smells like jasmine from the vine climbing up my neighbor's fence, and somewhere in the distance a bird is singing its evening song. This is my life now. This quiet, peaceful, beautiful life that I built with my own 2 hands. I'm 67 years old. I've been divorced for 6 years. I live alone in a small apartment with yellow walls and too many books and plants that I talk to in the mornings. And I have never been happier. I want you to really hear that, friends. I want you to let it sink in. Because I know some of you are thinking what I used to think, that happiness is for young people, that by the time you're my age, it's too late to change, that if you haven't found joy by now, you never will. But that's not true. That's a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the hard work of transformation. It's never too late. As long as you're breathing, as long as your heart is beating, you have the power to choose differently. You have the power to choose yourself. I think about Richard sometimes, not with longing or regret, but with a kind of distant compassion. The way you might think about someone you used to know, someone whose path diverged from yours long ago. I hope he's found some peace. I hope he's learned to face his mortality without running from it. I hope he's figured out who he is when he's not desperately trying to be young again. But I don't need to know. I don't need to manage his journey or worry about his progress or feel responsible for his happiness. That's not my job. It was never my job. And finally, after 67 years, I understand that. The thing about midlife crises, and really any crisis, is that they reveal the truth. They strip away all the pretense and politeness and fine, everything's fine, and show you what's really underneath, what your marriage is really made of, what your partner really thinks of you, what you've really been building all those years. Sometimes the truth is beautiful. Sometimes you discover that your relationship is stronger than you knew, that your partner truly sees you, that you've built something worth fighting for. But sometimes the truth is painful. Sometimes you discover that you've been invisible all along, that your needs never mattered, that the life you thought you were building was really just a backdrop for someone else's story. Richard's midlife crisis showed me the painful truth. But it also set me free. Because once I saw the truth, I couldn't unsee it. Once I understood that I'd been disappearing for 31 years, I couldn't go back to being invisible. Once I realized that his crisis wasn't my problem, I could finally start focusing on my own life. The crisis was a gift. A painful, unwanted, devastating gift, but a gift nonetheless. And I'm grateful for it. Truly grateful. In a way I never could have imagined when I was standing in that kitchen watching my husband gush about a red sports car. I've learned so much in these past 6 years. About myself, about relationships, about what it really means to love someone and be loved in return. Let me share some of it with you, friends. Consider it Auntie May's advice from the woman who learned these lessons the hard way. First, you cannot fix another person. I know you want to. I know that if you just love them enough, support them enough, sacrifice enough, they'll change. They'll become the person you need them to be. But it doesn't work that way. People change when they want to change, when they do the hard internal work of transformation. You can support that process, but you can't do it for them. And if you try, if you make their problems your problems, if you carry their burdens at the expense of your own well-being, you'll only lose yourself. Second, his crisis isn't your problem. I don't care what kind of crisis it is. Midlife crisis, career crisis, identity crisis, whatever. If your partner is going through something difficult, you can be supportive, you can listen, you can encourage them to get help, but you are not responsible for fixing them. You are not required to sacrifice your own happiness to manage their unhappiness. You are not obligated to disappear so they can find themselves. Their journey is their journey. Your job is to take care of yourself while they figure it out. Third, choosing yourself is not selfish. This is the one that took me the longest to learn. This is the lie I believed for 60 years. I thought that putting myself first was selfish, that good women sacrificed, that my value came from what I could do for others, not from who I was. But that's backward. That's toxic. That's a recipe for a lifetime of emptiness and resentment. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It's necessary. It's healthy. It's the only way to show up fully in your relationships because you can't pour from an empty cup. When you choose yourself, you're not abandoning the people you love. You're modeling healthy behavior. You're teaching them that you matter, that your needs are valid, that you're a whole person deserving of care and attention. Fourth, it's never too late. I was 61 when my marriage ended. I was 61 when I started building a life of my own. I was 61 when I finally chose myself. And these past 6 years have been the best of my life. It's not too late for you either. Whatever age you are, whatever circumstances you're in, whatever you've been through, it's not too late to change. You can choose yourself today, right now, this very moment. You can start small, set one boundary, express one need, do one thing that's just for you, not for anyone else, and then do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. That's how transformation happens, not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of tiny choices, thousands of times when you choose yourself instead of disappearing.